Hello and welcome to Stekui podcast. This show is brought to you by Satoshi Labs. Now, Satoshi Labs is a holding company and a mother of four very important companies for the Bitcoin ecosystem. The first one is Trezor, the original hardware wallet. The second one is Invity.io. That's the onboarding tool in the Trezor Suite environment. The third company under Satoshi Labs is Tropic Square. Tropic Square is aiming to develop the world's first open secure element chip coming soon. And the fourth company under the Satoshi Labs holding is Bexel, BEXL.IT. And Bexel is a social network for Bitcoiners to buy and sell Bitcoin, non-KYC, peer-to-peer, with full privacy. So check out Bexel at bexel.it. And you can find everything about Satoshi Labs and the companies at satoshilabs.com. And at Satoshi Labs is the presence at all the social networks. The second sponsor of the show is Brains, brains.com. And Brains is a Bitcoin mining tools company. Brains have recently launched the Brains Mini Miner. It's a little device that allows you mining at home. I have been running the Brains Mini Miner for a few days now. It's a lot of fun. I get to learn how mining actually works. I get to connect to Brains mining pool. You can also try the so-called lottery mining. Aim for the big 3.125. You never know. So check out everything that Brains do at brains.com, and that's double I in the Brains. And last but not least, sponsor of the show is a biofarm in Czech Republic, a ranch that specializes in grass-fed cows. It's called Ekofarma Arnultovice. The website is biomasičko.cz. I will link it in the show notes, but that's only relevant to you if you live in Czech Republic, and this farm can ship you a very high-quality grass-fed meat straight to your doors once a month. Thank you for watching my show, and now on to the show with Tuur Demeester. Welcome everyone to the Stekui podcast. This is a very special episode because I'm not in my usual studio. I'm at BTC Prague at the AmityAge Satoship, and my guest today is Tuur Demeester. Welcome, Tuur. And usually my podcasts are in Czech, and during BTC Prague, I do these special English episodes. And I'm very glad I can do that because I have a chance to interview people that have been in Bitcoin for a very long time, like Tuur. Tuur has been in Bitcoin since 2011. He is the editor-in-chief at Adamant Research, a company that he founded. And at Adamant, Tuur publishes Bitcoin analysis since 2011. Tuur is also a co-founder of the Belgian Rothbard Institute and a translator of Murray Rothbard's What Has Government Done to Our Money? And De Soto's Money, Bank Credit and Economic Cycles. Welcome, Tuur. Thank you for giving your time to this podcast.
Thanks, Josef. Happy to be here. And I really sympathize with, having to juggle between two languages. If I could only speak in my own language to people, I could not talk about Bitcoin really. Like it's switching to English. I've had to do it all my life. Yeah.
Yeah. You're originally from Belgium, but you have been living in the US for some time now.
Yeah, about 10 years now. Yeah.
10 years. Okay. So at first, let's do like the intro questions that I have been giving my guests for some time now. So the first question is, when did you first hear about Bitcoin?
I first heard about Bitcoin must have been like April 2011. I had friends who lived in Argentina, and they were talking to me about it, and he really encouraged me to learn about it, and then also was generous with his time. Like I really got to ask a lot of questions. So yeah, 2011, and then I also traveled to Argentina, which helped a lot to understand how it could be useful and how it works. So I got very lucky with meeting a few key people who were able to answer my questions.
Yeah, Argentina is interesting because Ludwig von Mises gave the series of talk in Argentina.
That's right.
Like long time ago, obviously. And there was recently the MMA fighter, I believe, forgot his name, who mentioned this series of topics.
The Brazilian guy, he's like, remember the 6 lessons of the Austrian school. I mean, to me, this is incredible. Like you know, when we started the Rothbard Institute in 2006, and so even in Europe, you know, the Austrian school was like maybe a footnote, and that's only if you did pursue a master's in economics.
Yeah.
Maybe it gets a footnote here or there. So it was, for a long time, even friends and family, they were like, well, what are you doing? And now it's exhilarating to see people like Millet, presidential candidates in the US, all kinds of people are Bitcoiners, obviously. In every Bitcoin book almost, you read paragraphs about the Austrian school at least. So it's like a renaissance.
Yes,
It's incredible.
Yes. What I wanted to say, it's a major renaissance of the Austrian school. I used to be, or I was an Austrian, or the adherent of the Austrian School of Economics before I discovered Bitcoin, and it's a beautiful merge because the Austrian school offers the theoretical paradigm for understanding money and Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's like Austrian economics makes common sense. Bitcoin makes common sense. So yeah, they like each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the second intro question is: have you ever been scammed?
Not in the sense of, you know, I was targeted and I paid someone money. And, actually, yes, no, by a lawyer. Yes, he was offering some service, and it sounded great. But then we decided it wasn't exactly what we wanted, and he just kept
Yeah.
I think technically he was in the right, but I just felt like it was scammy to just, to spend 1 hour of your time with a client and then still keep the full deposit. But in the crypto, Bitcoin, knock on wood, other than scammed by my own stupidity, you know, sometimes I bought a few shares of like Neo and B, like a little startup, and they went to zero, and then so yeah, I've been scammed by my own stupidity, yes, or like, you know, putting on too much leverage or shorting something right when it's like I shorted what was this currency? Not Monero, but the privacy coin.
Mimblewimble?
No, before the Zcash.
Zcash, yeah.
Well, because when they came out, the valuation of one coin went to like one Bitcoin for one Zcash.
It was like $1 million, maybe. Like it was even much more than one Bitcoin. Like at the first day, it was like $1 million or something.
Well, yeah, it was
really
because I was stupid. I didn't do my research, and because they had only dropped 100 coins for the whole world, like 100 new coins, and so anyway, I was like, this is a no-brainer. I'm gonna short it, haha, and I felt so good. And then it went from 1 Bitcoin to 5 Bitcoin for one Zcash. And now, yeah, anyway.
Right. Yeah. Good lesson there still.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the last thing you bought with Bitcoin?
I really have to, I looked at your question earlier and I had to think hard. And I mean, whatever the answer is going to be something boring. I think I just like to spend dirty fiat, you know, like I like to spend bad money and save good money. And also it's more complicated in the US because you have to pay capital gains tax on every Bitcoin that you spend, and it's just not fun, you know. So in a way I'm taking the lesson. It's like, okay, you're telling me to not sell Bitcoin? Okay, I'll just not sell it.
Yeah, that's legit. So the final intro question is, do you hold any quote unquote unpopular opinion on Bitcoin?
Maybe unpopular among Bitcoin maximalists. I don't think Bitcoin is going to solve all our problems. I think, yes, economically we will win with Bitcoin, but it's very important to think about how we will win. Because if, for example, in the process, we end up humiliating our, opponents or people who don't believe in it, and they lose economically, it sets you up for a lot of problems down the road. And so I think it's very important that we think about how do we behave in this world, even if we believe that we will win. So maybe that's not so popular.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that. A couple of years ago, I had an interview with Paul Rosenberg, the author of the Wayfaring of, I forgot the title. The Wayfaring of, do you know what's the book?
It doesn't ring a bell, no.
Yeah, he's like a cypherpunk author. The Lodging of the Wayfaring Man. Yeah, that's the title of the book. And one thing that stuck with me over the years is in the end, you need to basically build a bridge for your enemies to retreat on. And because the states have the nuclear weapons, they have all the arms, and you don't want them to be too desperate, basically. You don't really want the people in power to be too desperate and for them to feel like they have no way out of this situation.
Yeah, the way one of the words that is used is I think death ground. You don't want to put your enemy on death ground, which is a situation where they feel like either they fight or they get killed. You know, and that's when people are very fierce opponents.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, build the bridge. Exactly.
Right. So to get a little bit deeper into the topics that you've been thinking and talking about over the years, 13 years in Bitcoin is a very long time. So you've seen the cycles. There have been multiple cycles over this long period of time. So I'm curious whether you think if this time is different, because we have the ETFs, we have corporations like MicroStrategy, and recently there was a couple of others adopting Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. We have the nation states involvement like Salvador. So do you think like there is still the cycle, or we can escape the cycle?
Yeah, it's funny you say, like, I've seen cycles. It's like, that's true. I've seen a bunch of cycles. And also, I was so stupid enough to call myself, I'm the price guy. I talk about the price and I try to. And so it's always been a lot of pressure to try and understand what's happening. Because that was my background. I was a market analyst before I knew about Bitcoin. So, yeah, is this cycle going to be different? One simple thought that I keep having, that I find hard to dispute, is that I think human psychology, or the human brain, has a limited capacity for exuberance. We have a limited capacity for dealing with excitement. And if we are excited for too long, eventually we self-sabotage. We just find, we go all in on the poker table. We do something stupid. I don't know. And so I think that's what we've seen over and over with the bull markets, is that, and that's probably why the price is very hard to predict, but actually the timing is not that hard, because I think it's maybe hardwired into our physiology that we can only be excited as a group for 18 months or 24 months. And then we start just over leveraging and eventually causing the beginning of the bear market. We get overly courageous. We start taunting our enemies. You know, we start getting arrogant.
Yeah, not staying humble.
Yeah. So and I struggle with it too. You know, in a bull market, it's very hard to not get caught up in the euphoria. You know.
Yeah.
So I don't see a reason why this time would not be different. I think maybe 2 years bull market is okay. Like 24, 25, and then I don't know. Something will happen. It doesn't mean that fiat is going to be the great place to be. Maybe there will be another bubble next to Bitcoin, that Bitcoin goes away for a while and it goes back, and it's, who knows what it is. It doesn't have to be the dollar, for example.
Yeah, it always felt to me that people are too bullish in the short term, especially in the raging bull market, and too bearish in the long term. Because a lot of people sort of exaggerate like the price moves in the coming 12 to 18 months, but they have a hard time imagining that, for example, the US dollar can fail as well as the preceding global reserve currencies.
I would agree. I agree with that, except I think in the early bull market, which I think we're still in the early bull market, people tend to underestimate how high we can go in the early stages. Because right now, we are seeing some new money come in, but it's more like smart money. Yeah. We don't really hear the Uber drivers. Everyone's talking about Bitcoin, your grandmother. Like, it's not really happening. And so I think that the overestimation comes a bit later. But for example, now, I think psychologically, people still don't really believe we could go to like 300,000, 400,000 in this bull market.
Yeah.
I think maybe they say it, but it's different than, yeah, it just doesn't feel real yet. Maybe once we go above 100,000, people be like, oh, this is happening.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So on the topic of price, in the recent podcast with Peter McCormack, what Bitcoin did, you mentioned that this bull market may be really special in terms of the levels that we reach. So would you like to make this rough price prediction? What would be the levels we could reach this time?
Yeah, I there's a lot to say, of course, about why, but roughly speaking, I think the psychological barrier that we have to push through is gold, is 1 kilo of gold. We hit 1,000 gram of gold per Bitcoin in 2021. We hit 1,000 gram again in 2022. Then we went down. Now we are again at 1,000 grams because gold has also been going up, And I think this is psychology. It's similar to when Bitcoin was $10, $100, $1,000. People find it hard to believe that one Bitcoin can be more than 1 kilo. And so I think as gold as the big opponent for this cycle. And so if you look at the market cap of gold, the Bitcoin equivalent price is more or less $600,000. And so I don't necessarily believe we will reach 600, but I think it will become the psychological goal. Just like last cycle, we were like, Bitcoin is going to 100,000, and then we went to 65 and then dropped. Maybe this time, Bitcoin is going past gold, meaning past 600,000, and maybe we reach 400, 500, and then we take a break.
Yeah, I'm glad you're mentioning the comparison to gold. I like to make that as sort of a milestone in Bitcoin's journey. I really like that Clark Moody on the Moody dashboard has this price ratio or the market cap ratio of Bitcoin versus gold. So, and I actually put that in my newsletter that I've been writing for 3 years. Always I put that percentage.
Oh, great. What is it now?
It's like 8 to 9%, I believe, of like Bitcoin market cap to the gold market cap. And yeah, the parity would be around 700K.
700. Yeah, because of course, as gold goes up in dollar terms, then that parity goes up as well.
Yeah, I believe that's the real measure. So for example, the shitcoins we measure in Bitcoin. So I always point out Ethereum had its all-time high in June 2017 because it was 0.15 Bitcoin. Or 0.15 Bitcoin. And since then, it's been basically dropping. In dollar terms, it reached its new all-time highs, but in the sound money in Bitcoin, it was always dropping throughout the years.
Yep.
And then the question is, okay, so what do you measure Bitcoin in? Because you can say one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, but that doesn't measure its value, its purchasing power. So I believe the ratio to the gold market cap is the most precise instrument that we have.
I think it's good. Yeah, I also like the commodity indexes, like just measure gold against Bitcoin against commodities. But it's relatively similar. Gold has done a little bit better than commodities over the last 20 years, but for now it's pretty similar still.
Yeah. So, what is your take on hyperbitcoinization? Do you believe in that scenario? How would that work? Or what are the steps to hyperbitcoinization, let's say?
Yeah, so hyperbitcoinization was coined as a word by Daniel Krawitz, I believe, in 2013, 2014.
I think 13 maybe. Yeah,
maybe 13.
Satoshi Nakamoto Institute.
Yeah, and so you can find the article still, and he defines it as Bitcoin-induced demonetization. Which is really interesting because it just means that Bitcoin is taking on the role of money more and more and more. And as we know, as Hemingway said, people go bankrupt first very slowly and then very suddenly, very fast.
Yeah.
And it's the same with fiat currencies. Like they are strong, they grow weaker, and then they collapse is almost always the scenario. Which we're probably going to see in real life with Japan, I think, in the next few years.
Oh, yeah.
But so, yeah, Bitcoin-induced demonetization, it basically means that Bitcoin becomes the recipient of a lot of that value, which means a melt up in the value, almost like a hockey stick. Yeah, and I think this year is a very important year for mass adoption of Bitcoin. I think it's, comparisons with internet adoption is always a little, because it was very important, but at the same time, the internet didn't really entirely change society. Like there was some new people that became wealthy, of course, but if you early enough, yeah, I don't know. It just, you have to be careful. But still, we can look at the adoption, the important points in 1995 was very important as an adoption point, Windows 1995.
Yeah.
And so I think this is that year. We are in the pivotal year. I think ETFs are the equivalent of Bitcoin in 1995 because now everybody has access. Everybody who has a bank account, almost, I think it's like that in Europe as well. Like you should be able to buy some stocks, meaning you can buy the ETF. I think very, very important year. Also, it's a bull market in Bitcoin, but people are going to Bitcoin because they are afraid, not because they're greedy. They are feeling fear about bonds. They're feeling fear about the banks. They're feeling fear about the regular stock market, like is this, or about government deficits, all these kind of things. So, and that's the right motivation because you want to go to Bitcoin as a conservative, from a conservative mindset. You want to conserve what you have. That's the right mindset instead of making a quick dollar by just flipping a coin.
Yeah, so it would gradually become, as they say, the risk-off asset or as a store of value rather than a speculative instrument. Like, I understand it as such. For a long time, I guess a lot of the Bitcoiners do. But in the general perception, it's still like a speculative instrument, sort of like a tech stock.
I think that's changing now.
Yeah.
This year is really, people are making a shift. It's funny, because I gave an interview, my first interview in many years, for the Belgian Financial Times, and on the front page when they announced the interview in the back, the quote was, "Bitcoin is actually a conservative investment." That's the headline.
That's good.
So I thought, I think they put it there because they know part of the audience already starts to believe it.
Yeah.
So I think this is the beginning of hyper-Bitcoinization. I mean, of course, we keep saying, when is it going to happen? But I think it's exponential, of course. So in the beginning, it feels a little slow, but I think we will live in a different world in 5 years, 7 years from now.
Yeah, maybe a little tangent. You mentioned Japan, and I believe that's one of the most important developments that's going to happen. What's the debt to GDP ratio? It's like 250% now.
Yeah, 266, but that's a little outdated. We're actually we must be higher, but the official number is unknown. Maybe it's 300 already.
Yeah. So have you been watching Japan? Can you just shortly summarize like what happened to the economy? What happens when the debt levels are so high? And why don't they see any like inflation rates?
Yeah. Well, so Japan has been first in many ways. They had an enormous tech bubble in the 1980s. I remember in Belgium, you could see Japanese tourists everywhere because they had so much money. So they had a tech bubble, meaning they could very cheaply also create a lot of debt. And so they did. They created so much debt since the 80s for 30, 40 years. And they were also one of the first to keep lowering the interest rates, lower than all the other central banks. And that made it very attractive to borrow yen, invest in somewhere else, make a profit, pay back the debt, borrow more yen. And so it's called the yen carry trade. And it went around the world. So basically, they were able to export their inflation for decades. Not because they're the smartest or they found a magic solution to circumvent the laws of economics, but just because they were first. So they did that for so many years, QE forever, like money printing. But now the money is coming back home. People are starting to sell Japanese government bonds because they know it's never going to be paid off. And so they were the first to benefit from crazy inflationary policies. Well, now they're going to be the first to experience hyperinflation. That's what I believe is going to happen. And so in some ways, it's going to be an important lesson for us in Europe and for people in the United States, I think, because it'll be an advanced economy that this is the first time since the war, that we will see go through very high inflation.
Yeah, I always like to point out that the economic the laws of economics apply with the same force as the laws of like the natural laws, the laws of physics. You can like all the debts must be paid in the end, either through outright paying the full value of the debt or through default, so that it's socialized. But you cannot hide away from it. The same, you cannot hide away from gravity or
Exactly.
for that.
Exactly. You can try and manipulate it so that other people pay the bill, but somehow the bill gets paid.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, Japan. That's definitely an economy to watch. Back on the topic of hyperbitcoinization, have you been thinking about what are the major consequences of hyperbitcoinization? What would it look like, maybe for individual asset groups, if Bitcoin is starting to capture the monetary premium?
I think it's extremely healthy, because what has happened, or what always happens, when society's money grows worse and worse, if it's a bad money, then other assets take over the job. They start becoming monetized. And so we've seen that in real estate. Real estate has gone from a consumer asset or a business venture where, historically people would have some buildings and run it like a business, to a savings asset, a savings substitute, a monetary substitute. And you see the same with the stock markets, where it's kind of crazy. The valuations in the stocks, for example, Microsoft, for every $1, for every $36 that I pay to buy Microsoft shares, Microsoft, the company, makes $1 in revenue. So they have to work 36 years maybe to earn what I've paid for it now. That's completely unsustainable. But the reason is, it's similar in hyperinflationary economies. People put all the value in the stock markets because there is nowhere else to go. And so Bitcoin all of a sudden unlocks an escape possibility for everything to rebalance and come back to normal. But that means that, PE ratios in stocks can go from, and 36, by the way, is the average for US stocks, price to earnings ratio. They have to go down to maybe 10 or 5 to really normalize. So we are going to have, the depression was already going to happen. Like you say, inevitable, just a matter of when. The normalization of stocks. But the nice thing now is that we have a place to put the value. Whereas before, that's why you have so much chaos in society, is that the value goes to the corrupt politicians, or it goes in very strange places. Not to say it's not going to be bad, but yeah, like these asset classes are going to shrink. Technology stocks are going to shrink. We're going to see a boom in commodity stocks because we've been underinvesting in basic things like oil and food and those kind of things. And then we'll see a massive decline globally in real estate. Did you know more than half of the financial value of all the stuff in the world is in real estate today?
Well,
more than half. And it's just a bunch of sticks and like a roof. Like these houses that you see here in Prague, that is not how most houses look like in the world. Most houses look like cardboard boxes, right? So it's absurd, that we live in an absurd world, and Bitcoin is going to normalize a lot of things.
Yeah. As you say, like real estate should be the consumption good, but in many places around the world, it's the only way to preserve the purchasing power, because there are no stock markets. The currency is really bad, much worse than US dollar or euro. The inflation rates in Africa average 20 to 30%. There's nothing else, basically. So
yeah, and also it's the only way to participate in the proof of stake program of fiat, right? You want to be close to where the money comes, and that is a mortgage. It's like that is where the money is printed fresh. And so yeah, that's the way to either grow rich or maintain normal value and beat the inflation game, and everybody else loses.
Right. And in terms of the effect of the sound money standard, let's say, on the state power, because we could make the argument that ever since the fiat era began, the states have amassed so much power that they didn't have in the history. So do you think this could be reversed in the future through Bitcoin?
Yeah, like Daniel Kravitz says, if Bitcoin is hyper-Bitcoinization is Bitcoin-induced demonetization, well, you're also defunding the state at the same time, because the state has the monopoly on the money, and if the power of their money goes down, then their physical power also. And you saw this in the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia. I remember reading about the economy, and I think it was Yeltsin who was noticing, like, hey, I'm here in power. I'm supposed to be the boss of all of Russia, and we are barely seeing any money come in. Like, what's going on? And he investigated. And because the inflation was so high, the government had started accepting physical physical goods as taxes. So you could just send a container of stuff to Moscow, and then they would somehow sell it and pay the bureaucrats. And so it's like money is like the blood. So if the blood goes bad, then the whole system has problem to keep functioning, especially the government. So yeah, I mean, I think weirdly, I think we have seen peak government already. Maybe the year 2015. Maybe that was the peak power of all the governments in the world in terms of how many resources they actually can control, or how much capitalize they can mobilize in a short amount of time. So for example, in COVID, you saw, right? They were panicking. They pressed one big button, create $1 trillion, and the whole economy changed in just like 1 year. All the activities were changing. So, but once the money is worthless or almost worthless, like in Argentina, they can print however many trillion, but the economy doesn't really change anymore. Governments are going to shrink, I think, and that's why it's more power is going to go to civil society, which means it's more important for us to think about how do we want to do things.
Yeah, that's definitely an optimistic thought. If we already saw the peak of government, that would be a great thing. And regarding the Bitcoin volatility, because that's like for newbies, that's the main concern. Do you think like the volatility will taper out as the market cap grows? We have mentioned that maybe the gold market cap around 700K. Would that still mean we could see the 80% drops, or will that hopefully taper out to like couple digits drops, as would be the case with like major assets?
Well, as Bitcoin gets adopted by more and more people, gradually we will reach saturation. Eventually we have 100% of people have exposure to Bitcoin. But basically, I think, yes, volatility will decline because the relative share of diamond hands versus weak hands is going to increase. So we will have more stoic hodlers who, no matter what, they keep hodling. It doesn't matter. They panic less. Means the drawdowns get less deep. But at the same time, fiat is going to start collapsing. And that is going to create inherently a lot of volatility. Like, look at Weimar Germany. Look at all those spikes. It's extremely volatile. So it's a little bit hard to say. I don't think. I think in a way, no volatility is like a pipe dream. It's just impossible. And I think it
doesn't make sense in a dynamic world.
It's a fantasy of central planners who are fundamentally afraid, and they always try to smooth everything over, and then they create more problems. So, but yeah, I mean, 80% crashes, those are brutal. I think that's more behavior like a penny stock, or like in the very early age of like petroleum exploration, you saw extreme price movements. But as you get more adoption, like the gold market cap it's not so volatile. So
gold doesn't drop 80%.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So let's switch to a completely other topic, which is still very much relevant to Bitcoin and this discussion. I really liked the topic of Bitcoin urbanism that you have recently sort of brought in, or that was my perception. You had this panel discussion at the Bitcoin Commons, was it?
Or in Austin, in Texas. In Austin? Yeah. It's called the Bitcoin Commons, yeah.
So just please introduce the topic a little bit. What is actually, what can we imagine under the term Bitcoin urbanism?
Yeah, I did not invent the word, but we did organize the first kind of public event about it in Austin. Bitcoin urbanism is similar to hyperbitcoinization. You could actually call it Bitcoin-induced urbanism. Like, what cities, what buildings will people build if we are on a Bitcoin standard? And it's, the more you think about it, the more, at least for me, the more interesting it becomes, because really Bitcoin changes people's economic incentives. Fiat is very short-term focused. You just think about surviving until tomorrow. You get a big mortgage today. You want to build the building, flip the house, sell it, pay back the mortgage, do it again. So that gambling mentality is very much part of fiat. And so then all of a sudden, what happens if everybody has Bitcoin? Then you are incentivized to think much slower. You are not in a hurry to spend your Bitcoin. It's great money. It's the best money. And so will people still build houses? Yeah. But they will think about it differently. It won't be to make a quick dollar. I think it will be more to build a house for your family. It's going to last for a long time. When you get older, you also think about leaving a legacy. Like people between age 60 and 70, they donate to the church or the university. And you know, maybe we'll get into this, but I think Bitcoiners will more and more become part of the financial elites of the world. You know, and like a simple way to think about it is people who are worth $50 million or more. There's only about 250,000 people like that in the world.
Right.
And right now, the estimates are that about 1% of those people is Bitcoiners. So there are about 2,500 people who have made their money in Bitcoin, become rich in Bitcoin, that are part of the global financial elites. And those are the people that build the houses, build the sports stadiums, you know, those kind of things, churches, you name it, all the beautiful buildings we see here in Prague.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, some of them are by the government, but probably more than 90% are just private capital.
Yeah.
So as the share of Bitcoiners grows in the global financial elites, maybe eventually we go to, maybe in 20 years, there'll be 50% of the world's wealthy people will be Bitcoiners. Yeah, we will start leaving a mark. And so I think Bitcoin urbanism are going to be the houses and monuments that we built based on the values that we have. And that's part of the what that is what I think I want to talk about. I don't know the answer exactly. I have some ideas, but it's up to us to decide, basically.
Yeah, I like how we as a Bitcoiners are starting to notice and point out that we as a society nowadays are not as rich as we imagine to be, because if you look at how the houses were built 150 years ago on the gold standard, it was like the peak of the gold standard era, like late 19th century. If you look at what people ate, what their general level of health was in terms of metabolic health, like people weren't obese in general. So you start to witness that we are actually much poorer than we imagine ourselves to be, because we live in worse housing, we eat much worse food. Matthew Lisek recently published the Fiat Food book by, it's published by the Safe House, by Seyfedin Amos's publishing
I have
house.
a signed edition. I met him in Austin briefly. Yeah, he was there.
Yeah, I don't have it signed, but I bought it in Atlantis, Bitcoin Atlantis,
cool.
and at first I didn't like. It was just part of the Safe House edition, because I bought all the preceding books. But it was actually very well argumented book about how the Americans, in particular, are much poorer than we imagine. Which is really eye-opening if you come to think about it.
Yeah, and it's. I do think it's understandable why we developed the fiat system. I think Safe has actually written about that. That there were some real problems with a globalizing economy and a gold standard, because you can always confiscate gold. And of course, digital means that you can send things around the world very easily.
The portability. Gold has a real portability problem.
Yeah, exactly. So it's understandable that we switched, but it's a very problematic system. It's almost like equivalent to oh, we need plumbing because we have big cities, and all our plumbing is lead. You know, we get poisoned by the thing that we created, and Bitcoin fixes it. Yeah.
So I think you touched on that in the panel in Austin. The visual aspect of buildings. Why it used to be the case that the cities were in general beautiful. And it was US as well in the 19th century of the gold standard.
Yeah.
There was like a specific architectural style.
Well, like a Jugendstil and Art Nouveau.
Yeah, Art Nouveau.
And then there was also Neo-Gothic stuff being built. Yeah, definitely like ornamentation was part of the culture. You know, people love to celebrate beauty in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a specific need. It's a need. It's not just something that you can get rid of. And in Prague, actually, if you walk around a little bit, especially in Vinohrady, which is like the residential area built in late 19th, early 20th century, so during the gold standard, you can see all this beautiful ornamentation on the buildings. But some buildings are basically clean, like the facade is clean. And that happened during the communist era where the maintenance, like people didn't have enough resources for the maintenance. So you can see like these buildings that are like old, built in that time frame, but they don't have the ornamentation. So you can see how it deteriorated with communism.
Fascinating. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting how the rise of communism came together with a rise in almost, I don't know how to summarize it, like some kind of self-hatred or something. Like there was, I think it was
very ugly.
Albrecht Loos or something. I forget his first name. Loos. He wrote a whole essay against ornamentation. And so it's from that. Then you had the Bauhaus school, which was all extremely clean, and the rise of modernism, which it's so interesting to think about it now because you know how after the war there was a lot of talk that classical architecture, that is the architecture of fascism because Mussolini and Hitler, they loved these, you know, big pillars and all, you know, those, and they wanted to rebuild the Roman Empire, and that's evil. But what people like Leon Krier point out is that what the modernists actually were doing is taking the architecture of the communists, the wartime architecture, the bunkers, the factories, all that vocabulary and grammar, and just put it on urban design. And so they made it turned the whole economy in like a war economy. You know, it's like a poverty-driven, state-controlled economic system. Anyway, but that's a whole aesthetic conversation. I think what's underneath that is just the economic incentives. Is that in the fiat system there just is no resources for building with bricks, like full white walls and doing the ornamentation. There is not the support system economically. And so, of course, people come up with all kinds of stories to justify, oh, you know, here we have a building that's so flimsy. And then they find a story that, oh, but it's more eco-friendly that way. Or who needs a big, thick walls? Or, you know, oh, we put solar panels, and that's durability, right? Durability is not a building that lasts 500 years. No. So people just come up with whatever stories. But like to your point, you know, there's been an incredible impoverishment of the quality of our built environment.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on the topic of the ruling elite, or like doesn't have to be like rulers in actual power, but
sure.
The elite, like with the financial resources, why do you think it's the case that, for example, the Medici family in Florence financed the Renaissance, like people like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and the beautiful architecture you can see around Florence? That was the financial elite of the time, and they had this preference for beauty and for these like long-lasting values. Why isn't that the case with the current financial elite? Because you have people that are really, really wealthy, but it doesn't seem like nobody's building like beautiful museums or operas and stuff like it used to be the case with the elites.
I think the simple truth is that an honest financial system rewards virtue, and a corrupted financial system rewards vice.
Yeah.
And so just like in communism, like the most virtuous people go to the gulag, and the worst criminals are the leaders of the state, you know?
Right.
And if you have a system or a society where there is a kind of a consensus that certain, you don't steal, and again, simple virtues are being appreciated, well, then you can grow your wealth economically and do voluntary trade. And okay, but then what do you do once you have an incredible business and it produces so much profit? Do you always keep building more? I mean, at some point you're going to die, so you can't do it. So at some point you think about, what do I want to leave behind other than a great business with people who get along well? You think about the arts, the culture, education, religion, those kind of things. And so it comes natural. Beauty, you cannot impose beauty from the top down. It's something that emerges from a healthy society. It's a sign of health.
Yeah,
that's how I see it.
It reminds me of Hayek's piece of writing titled "Why Do the Worst Get on Top?" And he meant in terms of, I think it was fascism or communism, doesn't matter basically. But it seems to be the case that even like the people with the worst values get on top in the fiat system as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just governmental power.
Yeah, because, imagine a system where if you're in the right position, you can steal from everybody all the time, whenever you want. Well, I mean, who's going to go to that spot? It's people who want to steal. If you don't want to steal, you don't go there. But
right.
I remember, it's hard to... If you want to be really honest in a fiat system, you're almost condemned to be poor. It's because in order to stay at the same... We've talked about this earlier in the conversation. Like, to stay at the same level, you have to participate a little bit in the stealing, because everybody steals from everyone.
It's true, because if you want to preserve your wealth, you need to ride the Cantillon effect, basically, which usually means you get a mortgage and you buy a real estate, and the inflation pays off part of that debt, basically, and the value of the asset of the real estate gets inflated because that's where the money goes. And if you understand that effect, you are incentivized to position yourself in that, even though you understand that somebody still has to pay for it.
Exactly.
And it's not you.
Exactly. Just like how, like Tether today, like the stablecoin, they have dollars that they offer as a service, and then the way they run their business is they buy government bonds, and that's the income for the company. It's like, it's like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah, that's very true. So on the topic of the architectural history, I always found it interesting that the inner cities in the US are usually like the worst part of the city, whereas in the Europe it's the best part of the city. So why is that the case?
That's interesting. Yeah, and did you grow up in Prague, or what?
Yes,
yeah,
in Prague, and the city center, like the Old Town Square, that's the touristy place. That's like the most beautiful buildings, the tourist traps. It's not a ghetto. Like there are usually in, definitely not in Czech Republic. There are no like ghettos around Europe. Depends, but usually it's not the city center.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very true what you're saying. I grew up in Bruges in Belgium, and so it's the same.
Yeah,
it's it's similar, and in Ghent and Antwerp is the same. I haven't thought about it much, but people say everything is built around the cars. That's true to an extent, but a lot of what is wrong with real estate in the US is central planning, really. There's a lot of central planning, and people don't really see it that way because it's not from Washington, D.C. It's the city who imposes zoning. Exactly, zoning. And because these cities are so young, the impact of zoning is very high. You can say, this is residential, and nobody can build a store, ever. Or you need to have minimum this much parking lot for this amount of building. And then you have like one building that's, 10 stories high, and then 2 acres of only parking. Even if nobody is parking there, they have to do it. And so, you get insufficient density downtown, and then it's like in any system, right? If there's an imbalance, you get problems, and so you get more homelessness. You get more. There's not enough money to maintain everything, and it gets really bad. So the U.S. is going to have to be rebuilt, and hopefully, sound money can do that.
Yeah, there's an old series of games called SimCity, like a simulated city.
Yeah.
You know about that? And I always enjoyed like playing that. But then, as I learned about economics, I found out like I realized it's basically a very unrealistic game because you just cannot plan the city top down like that and for it to prosper. That's why it's also. I always found it absurd how Nayib Bukele, the president of Salvador, had this plan for the Bitcoin city, which on the paper it looks horrible. Like if you really understand what you're looking at, like this fully planned, symmetrical city, it would never work. Or what's your opinion on the Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, when I saw that and when I heard the announcement, it really lowered my expectation for the entire El Salvador project. I was like, okay, what? Because we've had Henry Ford try to build Fordlandia in Brazil in the past, and it's a terrible idea to build a city top down. The best, what you usually do is you have some land and then you just put out some rules.
Yeah.
Use some basic rules, like you can do this but not that for building, and then you allow people to come in and build it up. But even that, you have to be careful. To not have too many rules, for example.
Yeah. Is there any good example, maybe in the US?
Maybe it was just a quick render, like I don't know how it's going to actually take shape, because we've seen some interesting, like Kayala, there's been a few interesting projects in Latin America, so maybe they will find the right people.
Yeah, right. I made a note, not sure if there's a question but let me just state it. It seems to me that the effect of fiat currency on the economy, because it affects everything. It's like food, like Matthew Lisek makes the case for fiat food versus like the nutritious food, the architecture. We could say even like culture, like what kind of songs are popular, like art and stuff, like the modern art versus the art that was made in Renaissance. So I think a lot of economists have been focusing on like the direct state interventions, like through taxes, subsidies, laws. But the effect of fiat currency itself has been quite overlooked in the like economics profession as such, with maybe the exception of some Austrian economists, not all of them. And I still think it was understated, sort of the effect of the fiat regime, because you could have almost like a minarchist state, but if the fiat eventually leads to full nationalization, let's say, maybe Japan is a good example here, because a lot of the Japanese companies are basically now state-owned, either through central bank or through the pension fund.
Yep.
And they didn't nationalize anything outright. It's just they basically bought everything with the newly printed money. So maybe just an observation.
No, I think it's an important one, and it's because in a way, it's like we are sorcerer apprentices, and we found this powerful potion in the laboratory, and we need to understand how powerful it is, Bitcoin, how much is going to change everything. So I think it's important to think and talk about, and in some ways, I think you're absolutely right. I also underestimated the influence of fiat money on everything. When you study Austrian economics, what I came away with was, oh my God, it's fiat money and monetary expansionism that causes the business cycle. And so, okay, with sound money, we could have stable, like a stable, solid economy. But I was really underestimating how much, like when the worlds of Michael Saylor, how much energy is leaking every day. Every day, economic energy is leaking from the system because of this wastefulness, this inflation tax that's not even, used ever. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's just wasted. It is not even that somebody buys something with that energy. It's just waste. Yeah, I think it's very important, and maybe it's only recently I started reading like The World of Yesterday, Stefan Zweig, who grew up in the late 1800s in Vienna and then lived through the First World War, and he was an Austrian part of the Jewish bourgeoisie there in Vienna, and the shift he's describing, like what life was like before fiat money and then after, even though he's not an economist, like he doesn't understand the monetary aspect, and maybe that's good because he's only looking at the psychology and all the how it feels, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's a little bit what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, I think economists in general sort of overlook like the broad impact of fiat currency, because there was no like Bitcoin is the mirror. It actually shows us we didn't have much choice before. Rothbard was always talking about the gold standard. I always found it funny that in some of his textbooks he used like gold ounces instead of US dollars in the examples. So the like pre-Bitcoin Austrian school, there was nothing else to go back to than the gold. So with Bitcoin, we can see this renaissance, not just of like Austrian economics as such, but the focus on the nature of money. And we are finding out what is the full impact of the fiat money.
Yeah, you often hear stories, and I'm sure there's a lot of them around in these parts of Europe, about what it is like to shift from communism to free markets. Like, it's such a big shock for people. And I think maybe this is similar. Like, we've been living under financial communism in the whole world.
Yeah.
And so Bitcoin is this culture shock. Like, we have to all learn, like, whoa, freedom. Like, that's crazy,
that's,
right?
that's a good term, financial communism. Because in the communist era, if you lived in the Soviet Union or Czechoslovakia, you had this positive example of the Western world. So you could always like make the argument, it's better somewhere else. And so what's the problem here? With money, we didn't have that. We didn't have anywhere else to look at and point at and say, you see, it's much better there because they are on the gold standard. But it's 140 countries, or how many there are, that are living on fiat.
And I mean, it's also justified to call it communism because central banking was one of the 10 planks of Friedrich Engels, you know, the communist program. So they actually realized one of the core desires of their political plans.
So we are slowly reaching the time slot that we have allocated. But so for the final topic, I'm interested in your opinion on the future of Europe. You live in the US now. There's the European Union. There's the Eurozone. There's a big case for pessimism here in Europe, but I'm curious if you still see some maybe optimistic trends that are developing in Europe.
Yeah, of course, there's lots of reason for optimism because there's so many young people, and you can there's always a path to individual freedom, no matter how crazy the country is. You can always, in your own way, find a way to live a real human life that is worthwhile, that is valuable. But on the societal level, I for the moment, I am still worried about I don't know how to summarize it, but there is a kind of a gloominess here, and I'm afraid that fear is going to transform into hubris and anger and trying to find scapegoats, and and so I'm afraid that the tribalism days are not over for Europe. And it's weird because today people seem to wake up and say, "Oh, there is populism." Whereas for me, growing up, I feel like the longer I'm away from Europe, the more I realize, like, yeah, but no, there was populism always. We had populism that we can live like there is no tomorrow, that deficits don't matter, that we can have as much debt as we want, that we can, let everybody come in from abroad and live for free, this utopia. That was also populism. But now we're starting to get a different type of populism. So, yeah, I do worry about, then also I worry about people feeling like they have a duty to fix everything in Europe, even though maybe Europe needs to have another big fight. And some of us are going to stand on the sidelines and come in and help after the fight,
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
that's also what I mean in the beginning with I don't think Bitcoin can fix everything,
Yes. Yeah.
If there is going to be a big fight, still, maybe it's already baked into the cake, right? Maybe Bitcoin is too late to fix that.
Yeah, maybe you cannot avoid the crisis, but Bitcoin can help with the restoration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
On that topic, I recently read a very interesting book. It's called Parallel: The Bitcoin Social Layer by Tuur Demeester. It's very new. In Atlantis, I bought there was 50 copies at the time, and it was a book on Bitcoin from a very different perspective because Brian writes about pre-Nazi Germany, so post World War I. And also late 19th century, and how the Expressionism, which was the popular cultural movement back then in Germany, how it helped pave the way for authoritarian regime. And he makes the parallels to the current US in terms of its cultural trends, the wokeism and stuff. And you can see many of these trends in Western Europe as well. Not as much here in Czech Republic and the Central Europe, some of that, but in Western Europe and US for sure.
Yeah.
So it's a piece of writing I would recommend.
I'm very interested, yeah.
And it's scary. It's actually scary because a lot of people have this idea that it was just Hitler or it was just Stalin. It's just these major historical figures. And there's always this fantasy, if you could go back in history, would you kill the baby Hitler? I don't think anything would change because it's the overall trend in the society that puts people like that on the to the top.
I very much agree, and I went to the National Gallery. There's several ones, but I went to the one where the top floor is 19th century, and then it goes to today all the way to the bottom.
Yeah,
and it's you could see there was such a fascination with death and darkness and nightmares and demons before World War I.
Yeah,
and then you see the
topic of the book as
and then
well,
of course you see a step change. It goes faster into more dissociation and all. You cannot recognize the faces anymore, but it's a logical evolution. It's not like the war changed everything. It was people. It's almost like they were anticipating destruction.
Yeah.
And of course, that doesn't mean it doesn't answer all the questions, but it would suggest that one central figure is not going to make the difference.
Yeah, war is a culmination.
People tend to create the thing they're most afraid of. It's weird, right? You think if you're afraid of something, you stay away, but people have this innate tendency to create what they're most afraid of. So, and I feel a lot of anxiety now in the world. So that makes me think, yeah.
Yeah. So now there are these two competing paradigms, whether Bitcoiners should basically stay put and try to improve bottom up, talk to your farmer, spread the Bitcoin adoption like that. I do that as well. One of the sponsors of the podcast is grass-fed ranchers that have been orange pilled quite nicely over the recent years, and I believe that is important. But there's also a competing idea that you should have a second passport. You maybe should think about becoming a nomad and just being where it's currently the best for you and your family. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think every individual situation is different, of course, and everybody's possibilities are different, but the fact that such a small part of the world, after 14 years, has decided to own some Bitcoin, like it's tiny, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's clearly such an amazing technology, means that there's a lot of avoidance. Like people are avoiding looking there. There's a lot of avoidance, especially in Europe. There's a lot of, I mean, I don't want to point fingers, but it happens here.
Yeah.
And so, and to me, the definition of addiction is avoidance. You avoid looking where, you know, where you feel strange, and you go somewhere else. You escapism. And so what do you do when you are surrounded by addicts? Is that number one is to take care of yourself. Like, you know, it doesn't mean you start hating people or getting angry, but it's like, make sure that you don't get drunk. Like, make sure that you look at the facts and look at what's real and what's not real. And possibilities are part of reality. Like, reality is not just what you can touch and feel right now. Possibilities are part of the fabric of reality. And so it's healthy and normal to look at the options in terms of what can happen to Europe, what can happen in my life, what should I prepare for. So to me, that's part of self-care, taking care of your own family, and I mean like your nuclear family. And then gradually you can go outside of that, you know, and you'll feel better doing it that way than if you turn it around and say, oh, but I must save everybody. You will drown with the ship.
You must run for the
office. You cannot save. You cannot do that. Yeah. And often it's interesting because often the more you actually take care of yourself, you become an example to other people. It's like, oh, wow, this guy showing me that I don't have to live in communism. Like maybe there's another way. And it doesn't mean that you have to get the second passport, or it means different things to different people. But yeah, no, definitely, because it's been my struggle too, where I feel guilty. Like it's like I found out this secret and now I have to tell everybody. But it's been 14 years. It's not a secret, you know? It's people make their own decisions. Some people decide to look away.
Yeah, and I've come to the conclusion there's no such thing as orange pilling. You cannot just impose Bitcoin on people.
Yeah.
I think it's comparable to like fixing the diet or having like a regular exercise regime. You cannot do that for other people.
Yeah.
You can show them the way. You can be an example.
Yeah.
It's a very good way to do it. You can put out like all kinds of content like podcasts, books, writings, but they need to internalize it for themselves.
Yeah, and I've actually, it's funny because like for me, I started doing things more publicly because I'm so frustrated that I couldn't orange pill anybody in my own like circles, and then in the long term, now they read a newspaper interview with me, and then that helps them. So it's like, who knows how it goes. It's funny.
Yeah, I think it's important for Bitcoiners to put the message out there, because you never know. It always, in the end, finds some recipient, someone who is tuned to the message.
But even that, you know, I think there's so many ways that you don't even know. Like just doing the right thing for your family, I think it's hard enough in many places, you know, because sometimes there's a lot of hostility if you speak, you know, openly. Depending on where you live.
Right. So, and to conclude that, what are you currently working on? Where can people find your content?
Yeah, I have a few projects. I don't talk about much yet, but of course it's related to Bitcoin. I mean, for now I'm still on X. If people just Google my name, I regularly do podcasts, and I live in Texas, so I always enjoy learning about Bitcoin and meeting entrepreneurs, and you know, being on podcasts like yours. I'm really, it's a lot of fun to be on a podcast where the host knows his stuff. You did research on me, which is very flattering. Great questions. So I'm very lucky in that sense.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. So I will put your contact details, like the X account and your website. You have a website, right? I believe.
Yeah, adamantresearch.com actually has an archive of my old reports. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I'll put that in the show notes. So thank you very much. Thank you, Tuur. And I hope you enjoy Prague. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the conference. What's your talk here at the conference, actually?
Yeah, the title is going to be "Bitcoin is Europeans' Mithril," and it's a reference to the Lord of the Rings, the There's a chain mail of very special metal that Frodo carries with them, and that protects him from, even protects his life at some point. So I'm going to be making the case that Bitcoin can play an important role for Europeans.
All right, I'll be sure to check it out. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tuur.
You're welcome, Josef.
Thank you for watching the podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe, even though most of the content is in Czech. But maybe AI will help out with that. All right, so thank you very much. And maybe 1 year from now, there will be another podcast in English. Thank you. Thank you for watching the Stekuj podcast. This show is brought to you by Satoshi Labs, the mother company behind Trezor, Invity, Tropic Square, and Vexel. This show is brought to you also by brains.com. Check out their new mini miner, and also by Ekofarma Arnultovice, biomasíčko.cz. If you live in Czech Republic, you can get a grass-fed beef straight from the farm. Thank you, and see you next time.